I have always known that I had a big purpose. Not to be cocky, but always knew. Just felt that driving power which made me fearless and relentless. My parents were told by more than one spiritual leader that I had a bright light around me. My uncle saw me before I was born and noted this light. My parents told me from birth my life would be hard, but it was to make me strong. A bigger purpose is what gave me the strength to keep living. Misty Upham.
Welcome to Margs and Mayhem, where I tell you a true crime story and we drink. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you choose to enjoy one of our themed margaritas, make sure you are of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly.
As a quick reminder, for this week and these types of episodes, we are not doing a themed drink. There are plenty of old recipes on my YouTube videos and on the podcast episodes, so you can find an old recipe if you're wanting to try a drink. For these types of cases, we're going to focus on the crime itself and any impact that we can make. Misty Ann Upham was born on July 6, 1982 in Kalispell, Montana. Her father was Charles and her mother was Mona. Her Blackfeet name was Sipatsima Akiwa, or Sweetgrass Woman. Both Charles and Mona, Misty's parents, had been sent to Indian industrial schools when they were children. In 1819, the U.S. Congress enacted the Civilization Fund Act. This was a fund put in place to allow missionaries to take in indigenous children and to replace their tribal traditions with, well, white traditions. In 1824, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was created in order to oversee these funds. You see, in the time since Europeans landed on the North American continent, those white folks had been doing just about everything in their power to rid North America of the indigenous folks that had been living there for at least 20,000 years. By the early 19th century, however, straight murder and pure genocide, it really wasn't in fashion anymore. So the new strategy was to, well, not kill the man, but kill the native within the man. Lovely. This era lasted from 1860 to 1978, over 100 years. 4 generations or more of people. At least 367 schools across the United States, mostly Catholic, indigenous children were stripped of everything they knew and loved about being Native and were instead basically trained to act like a European white man. Their hair was cut short. They were forced to wear styles of clothing that were not like their own. They were often physically punished for speaking in their native language, and contact with their outside family was often outright forbidden. Abuse was rampant at these schools, and I mean lots of different types of abuse: emotional, spiritual, sexual, and physical abuse. There were countless deaths, and I say countless because no one ever bothered to count. A low estimate at one Nebraska school was somewhere around 100. So multiply that by 400 schools, and I think you'll have some idea. Children were literally called dirty Indians by the only adults they were ever allowed to be around. Adults that they relied on to care for them. And that's what they did instead. The effects of this kidnapping and forced assimilation of thousands upon thousands of indigenous folks across the United States are still felt today. It's called historical trauma. Clinician and researcher Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart has this to say about historical trauma. It's the, quote, cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma experience. End quote. Historical trauma can impact a person's both psychological and physiological health, even if they didn't endure the trauma themselves. This cumulative effect of historical trauma can impact a person greatly. And it isn't just psychological, it's biological. Increased levels of stress hormones are often found in the children of people who've experienced direct trauma. It can be passed down in your DNA. A 2014 White House report on Native youth not only lists major disparities in the health and education of Indigenous youth in the United States, but also indicated that Native youth rates of PTSD and suicide are similar to that of Iraqi war veterans. Y'all, please stop saying to leave history in the past. Your privilege is showing. Not everybody is able to do that. Misty and her family, including her brother Christopher and her sister Amanda, spent time living both on and off the Blackfeet Reservation, which borders Alberta, Canada. Her father was a music teacher and her mother worked from home. They were all evangelical Christians. Her father would say that Misty, quote, loved life. She had ambition, vision, and a desire to make a difference in the world she lived in, end quote. During one of the times that Misty's family lived off the reservation, they lived in Billings, Montana, and it was at this time that Misty really experienced one of the first, public instances of racism within her life, something that she spoke about later. A white friend's mom told her daughter that she couldn't be friends with Misty anymore because Misty was Native, and that meant that she had bugs. Nice. Unfortunately, this would be the least of the traumatic instances that Misty herself faced in childhood. Misty would develop stomach ulcers due to a water bacteria found in what was supposed to be clean drinking water on the reservation, and it ate away the enamel on her teeth from throwing up so much from the stomach ulcers, and so she would have to get dentures as a young kid. And she would later speak openly about several instances of sexual abuse. She would tell a producer friend of being abused as a young child by a family friend. And she would speak openly about an incident when she was 13 years old and was sexually assaulted by a large group of boys or men. Historical trauma plus the actual trauma that Misty endured are likely what led to her having some mental health concerns. She had a tremendous amount of anxiety. Makes sense. There are other diagnoses that are pretty openly discussed within the media because of what comes later. And she was pretty open herself about her mental health struggles even before it was trendy to do so in order to end the stigma. It was really important to her to talk about those things to make it seem more normalized. If it weren't for what came next, the outcome for Misty, who was already having suicidal ideations as a preteen, well, her outcome might have been a lot different. When Misty was 12, she joined a local theater troupe called Red Eagle Soaring. Red Eagle Soaring is a Seattle-based nonprofit that provides Native American youth with integrated programming that combines contemporary theater and Indigenous traditions. It's pretty cool. Like many theater kids do, Misty found a safe haven within that theater community. She was finally in a place where she could truly be herself, she would later say. And Misty took her work at Red Eagle Soaring very seriously. Even later, her sister Amanda would say she really treated it much more like a job than anybody else. After all, she had stood up in one of those classes and announced to her peers, quote, "My name is Misty Upham, and someday you will know that name as the best living Native American actress," end quote. She wrote, directed, and acted for the next 8 years. She was auditioning for film by the time she was 18, and by the time she was 20, she was well on her way to living her dream of being a working actress. She had roles in Skins, Edge of America, and Expiration Date. I did catch a couple of her films, and one of them was one of her early roles as an Indigenous person named Lila Littlefoot in an independent film called Frozen River. It's on HBO Max if you want to check it out. A former theater teacher would say that Misty was tough as nails, and that is on full display in this film for sure. She was as persistent on film as she was in real life. A critic would say that she, quote, played every scene straight, truthful, and unfussy, without pleas for the audience's pity or sympathy, end quote. Sort of like her life, lived out on screen. The movie would be a standout at the Sundance Theater Festival in 2008, and Misty would be nominated for an Indie Spirit Award in 2009. Misty would openly refuse roles that showed Indigenous folks in a stereotypical light. This meant sometimes cleaning houses in between gigs to pay bills. This meant sometimes sleeping in her car when she couldn't pay rent. It was crucial to her that Indigenous people be cast in all kinds of roles. It was important to her that they be portrayed in all lights, as hero and as villain, and as complicated and as beautiful as any other in-depth character. She was willing to stand up for her convictions in this and would refuse roles where Native folks were being portrayed as alcoholics or addicts. Not many actors that early in their career have that much fortitude, so I think it's very commendable. Misty also used her burgeoning fame to speak out for causes that were important to her. She was an active and outspoken member of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, for PETA, and for the Caring Across Generations Foundation. But traumas continued to explode in Misty's life. In 2013, Misty attended the Golden Globe Awards. At some point during the ceremony, a Weinstein executive pulled Misty into the men's bathroom. He ripped her stunning green gown and sexually assaulted her in front of a group of men. They were literally standing there in formal suits cheering him on. When he was finished, she was forced to walk by these men who were high-fiving and cheering this guy on and walk alone back to her seat in a ripped dress at the Golden freaking Globes. Though the Me Too movement started in 2006 by activist Tarana Burke, it didn't really hit mainstream media until 2017. At that point, at least 87 women came forward with their allegations of assault against Harvey Weinstein himself. But this was 2013, and though Misty's family begged her to press charges, she was too afraid to. Even though she still had the dress that she wore with DNA undoubtedly on the dress, Misty was really afraid of how powerful those Weinstein executives were, and they were super powerful. She really believed that they had the power to even make her disappear, so she didn't say anything. And still, Misty persisted. In 2014, she was in probably her biggest known role in August, Osage County. I also watched this film for a second time because of doing this episode, and I paid a lot of attention to Misty's character. She is in the very first scene of the film, acting alongside Meryl Streep and Sam Shepard, and man, she really does hold her own. It's a little hard to explain if you haven't seen it, but it's very clear that Misty did a lot of internalization of her character and a lot of, creation of backstory and all of that for her character, because it gives it just this sense of depth where you can tell that there's something else going on behind her eyes, even though she doesn't have the lines in the film to say it. It's very well acted on her part. And I gotta say, there must have been some pressure. I mean, Julia Roberts is in that movie, Chris Cooper, Juliette Lewis. I mean, Benedict Cumberbatch is in that movie too. It's just a star-studded cast from start to finish. Some critics said it was the finest ensemble acting they'd seen in years. And the Hollywood Film Festival honored Misty and the rest of the cast with the Ensemble of the Year award for August Osage County. Meryl Streep would later say that she was honored to work alongside Misty and that she had, quote, a unique blend of authenticity and passion and compassion, end quote. I agree. During this time, Misty's family situation was complicated, and so she did what she could to help. She moved to Auburn, Washington, and into her sister's apartment, which was across the street from the Muckleshoot Casino, in order to help her father, who was recovering from a stroke. Amid the release of August Osage County, Misty would announce that she was pregnant with a little boy that she wanted to name Leaf. She would unfortunately miscarry soon after, and her family said this definitely aided in the deterioration of her mental health. In August of 2014, Charles, Misty's father, would call the police on Misty because she was having a dangerous episode in the apartment. By the time the police got there, she was outside, hiding between some bushes. She was arrested and simultaneously insulted by the police officers. Somewhere between when police arrested her and when she arrived at the hospital, she would get bruises and scratches mysteriously on her shoulder. And then she would start expressing that she was afraid of the police. Misty would be involuntarily committed for psychiatric care that evening. Less than a week later, she would be involuntarily committed again for a total of 4 times. By the time 2 days passed, she was calm and cooperative. She would tell a counselor that she had no, quote, plan, intent, or means to kill herself, end quote. Normally, I don't like to go this far into the detail of the psychological well-being of any particular victim in a case, but I do think it's important that you guys know that she had experiences with police officers in the past, and so she should have been on police radar for what came next. That's why I think it's important to talk about this. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't. On October 5th, 2014, Charles called police again. His daughter, Misty, had disappeared. The police first ignored Charles completely, spending 10 minutes searching an apartment that he said she wasn't in. He begged them to help. They refused. They said, "You have to wait 24 hours to file a missing persons report." Holy moly, how many of these actual police officers are going to continue to get this wrong? The police then did a cursory search around the apartment complex and left. When her father called the police again on October 6th, the next day, the Auburn Police Department refused to elevate her status to endangered. Knowing everything that they knew about this woman, they refused to elevate her status. When a detective was assigned to the case on October 7th, they did absolutely nothing, despite the family's desperate pleas for help. They literally told her family that she was probably just off partying somewhere. Why does this keep happening? After 6 days of begging the police to do their literal jobs, the family decided to organize their very own search party, because if the police aren't going to do it, then I guess they have to do it. On October 13th, an officer told that detective that, quote, "Nothing has been done yet," end quote, in the case of missing Misty Upham. The same day, because the freaking media was asking, the Auburn Police Department finally released their first statement about Misty's disappearance, a full 8 days after she disappeared to begin with. Never mind that the Auburn Police Department's Facebook page is a treasure trove of posts asking people to phone in or submit tips for other ongoing cases. Nothing for Misty until 8 days later. Right. And 11 full days after the disappearance of talented, kind, loving Misty Upham, the search party walked over to a wooded area right overlooking a steep 150-foot embankment. It was pretty close to the apartment she disappeared from, actually. They found a purple purse with several bottles of medication inside. The prescription was made out to Misty Upham. Jeff Barehand, the man who found Misty's body close to the purse, would sit with her for hours until the medical examiner brought her up the embankment. He didn't want her to be alone. Misty's community gathered around the bag that held her body, burning sage and putting cedar onto the bag before it was sent off to the medical examiner. The King County medical examiner ruled that the death of Misty Upham was due to blunt force trauma to the head and torso, but the manner of death could not be determined. However, the injuries are consistent with someone falling down a ravine. The timing of her death was dated to the night she disappeared. But could she have been saved if the Auburn Police Department had taken the urgent pleas of Charles Upham and actually started the search in earnest? We may never know. The police department doubled down on their terrible decision-making to not elevate her status, saying that she didn't meet the qualifications to have an endangered status. This is because she could drive her car and, quote, act as a perfectly functioning human being, end quote. Never mind that she had been involuntarily committed for psychiatric care 4 times in the past 2 years. and 2 of those times were within 2 weeks of her disappearance. So what do you think? Was the Auburn Police Department negligent in their handling of the Misty Upham case? Is it possible she would have been saved if they had just listened to the begging of the Upham family to help them find her? How may a lack of appropriate mental health services, especially for people in Indigenous communities, how may that have impacted what happened to Misty? Could there be something else done there that could have saved her life? Was the death of Misty Upham an accident, or was foul play involved? Misty's last film appearance in the movie Cake with Jennifer Aniston was released posthumously. Misty's family released a statement on October 17th, 2014, in which they said that they believed Misty had run out of the apartment because she was scared of police officers, and that she had come across the steep embankment and fallen. They have said that every single part of the investigation was mishandled, and that if things had been done differently, she might still be alive today. Actress Juliette Lewis, who met Misty on the set of August Osage County, had this to say, quote, "Misty Upham survived many things that many don't early on in life. She fought for the voiceless fiercely. She understood suffering and the deepest pain. She had a presence everyone saw and felt. It is this presence that will continue." End quote. The Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program has created an award in honor and in memory of Misty Upham. The Misty Upham Award for Young Native Actors will honor her dream of uplifting more Native youth in the performing arts. In March of 2020, Harvey Weinstein was found guilty of some of his crimes and convicted to 23 years in prison. As far as I could find, the Weinstein executive responsible for the sexual assault of Misty Upham has never been even identified, much less prosecuted. I'd like to take a small second to recommend a great podcast if you're looking for another true crime podcast. Wounded, a Native true crime podcast, had me hooked from start to finish. Wendelin and Paulino are fantastic hosts, and I suggest that you subscribe. Stat. Thanks for hanging out with me. Before I go, it's really important for me to make one thing clear. The story of the Indigenous people in the Americas is full of some just atrocities, from genocides. The story of Indigenous folks in the United States and the history is filled with atrocities, from diseases to relocation, to land theft, to murder, to intentional genocide. But Indigenous communities have always been resilient. There are 573 recognized Indigenous tribes in the United States today, and over 200 more that just aren't federally recognized. Indigenous leaders engage in and champion tons of social justice causes. Native nations have influenced and changed countless United States laws and policies. And these tribes are working tirelessly to reclaim their cultural and historical identities through cultural revitalization. It's clear, Native people are speaking. Are you listening? A former managing director of Red Eagle Soaring has this to say about Misty, quote, "Her legacy is huge for Native young people interested in being in film. It's a door that she opened. It seems possible to them." End quote. And you can help too. Support organizations like Red Eagle Soaring. They're places of hope and cultivating Native excellence. They give a home away from home for many kids who may need it. I've put a link to donate in the description box, and I've made a donation in Misty's memory. I hope that you'll do the same. Indigenous women are sexually assaulted at a rate that is 2.5 times higher than the rest of the general female population in the United States. More than 1 in 3 Native women will be assaulted in their lifetime, and many of those women will be assaulted more than once. The Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women is a Native-led organization that is doing the hard work to end these statistics. I've also given a donation to them, and I hope you'll do the same. The link is in my bio. Nothing can change what happened to Misty Upham. We may never know what happened to that bright light, that shining star, But for the sake of the friends and family who loved her, I hope they find the answers that they seek. I'll leave you today with a quote from another member of the Blackfeet Nation, a 19th century warrior chief called Crowfoot. Quote, "From nowhere we came, into nowhere we go. What is life? It is the flash of a firefly in the night. It is the breath of a buffalo in the winter time. It is the little shadow which runs across the grass and loses itself in the sunset." End quote.